Hello everyone, welcome to module number 7, and for this module we will be talking about sports tourism development process. So first we're going to be talking about the basic concepts related to development, and then we're going to talk about some of the processes that needs to be done in order to develop a certain event or a certain destination to make it more apt for sports tourism. So the first of the 3 videos that we have for this module is looking into some of the general issues that we have in relation to development and how it relates into sports tourism. So first, let's define what development is in general. So development is a broad perspective concerning appropriate future states and means of achieving them. As a process, it emphasizes the methods which might be employed to expand or bring about the potentials or capabilities of a phenomenon. So let us break the definition into segments so that we can better understand it. So first, we would like to note that development is future-oriented and that we want to see certain improvements or transformation of a given phenomenon in the future. Next, there are many methods that needs to be done in order to develop something or some place or people or a community. And basically, what we want to do as a part of the development process is to be able to identify actual and potential capabilities and futures for a given phenomenon. And for this specific discussion, we'll talk about the phenomenon of sports tourism. Now, let's define the development plan. Okay, so basically, the development plan is an articulation of the development process that we want to go through in order to develop a certain phenomenon. So it sets out specific steps through which desirable future states are to be achieved and developed as a product, indicates the level of achievement of an individual or society as in developing and underdeveloped countries. So if you remember your lessons on global stratification, we have generally 3 categorization of countries in relation to development. We have the underdeveloped countries, we have developed countries, and we have developing countries. So the Philippines, for instance, is a lower developing country, and of course United States and some states in the European Union are considered to be developed countries. And as we explained, tourism has a very important role in terms of increasing the development level of a nation because of the economic gains that it brings to a specific state. So every country, has a specific development plan in relation to, getting their country from one state to a better state after 6 or 10 years. But of course, development plan is not only about, countries, level of countries, but this can also be in terms of level of communities, level of individuals, level of institutions such as schools, and also level in relation to, destinations in relation to tourism. So we can also develop communities and locations and destinations in order for them to become more tourist attractive and sports destinations to become more tourist attractive as well. Now, recently, in the last how many years, we have already coined the term sustainable development, and because historically, when we talk about development, we have already made use of resources that have contributed to many ills of this world that we live in. Like, for example, we talk about climate change and pollution and overpopulation and poverty and scarcity of resources. So basically, we just don't talk about developing now, like from a status quo to a better state, but we also talk about getting to a better state, but doing it in a sustainable way, that we do not hoard so much of the resources or we do not hurt the environment or people as we go from this state to a better state in the future. So, formally, it's defined as a development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So, in short, conserving resources, taking care of the environment, making sure that the population level is at its optimum level. So, these are some, and also good health. So these are some indicators of what makes a development sustainable. And of course, a lot or a big chunk of strategies that go into sustainable development in terms of communities and societies are in the area of natural ecosystem and also cultural resources. Now, in relation to sports tourism, there are developmental activities that we do in relation to sports and sports tourism that can potentially hurt natural ecosystems, like for example building of establishments in relation to creation of in relation to sports, so and at the same time, cultural resources. For example, indigenous peoples that can be displaced because we want to build an arena or a stadium here. So, cultural preservation, environmental preservation should also be some of the things that we have to look into when we try to do, general societal development and even as specific as sports development as well. So inspired by the wonderful principles of sustainable development, we also have sustainable tourism, which is a tourism which is developed and maintained in an area, a community, in an environment, in such a manner and at such a scale that it maintains viability over an indefinite period and does not degrade or alter an environment, both human created and physical environments in which it exists to such a degree that it prohibits the successful development of well-being of other activities or processes. So in short, sustainable tourism is that strive towards the balance of conserving human and natural resources while we are also attracting tourism networks and activities in a given community or in a given site, because in historically, tourism has also contributed to a lot of environmental issues, like for example, waste management, overpopulation, and also human trafficking, commercial sex work that is not legal. So because of that, tourism, in terms of developing in the contemporary time that we have now, it's really more geared towards, let's get more economic gains, let's make our tourism activities and destination more interesting and attractive. But at the same time, let's protect the natural and the human resources that we have in the destination that we're trying to develop. Now, according to Hall in 1995, sports tourism can also be considered as sustainable. And sustainable sports tourism must be able to meet three overarching goals. And these are sociocultural goals. So this is something to do with communal goals and objectives. We have economic goals. And also we have environmental goals. So sustainable sports tourism must be able to engage people in terms of participation, planning, improve education, provide good health or maintain the health of the community and the tourists who are visiting, improve visitor satisfaction, and enhance the cultural dimension of the sport and the community where the sport is held and that are being visited by the tourists. Of course, generally tourism, one of the priority goals that we have is to increase the economic benefits that the community and the locals have when the tourists, do their tourism expenditures while they are in visit. So economic benefits must be able to trickle down to locals and stakeholders and not just, the owners of the establishments, but it has to trickle down to the locals and the dwellers of the community, and it has to be economically viable industry. So the basic things that the capital that must be put into this community or this development must of course generate return of investment at a shorter period of time. Also, when we try to develop a sports tourism destination or we try to plan a sports tourism event, we have to think of the environmental benefits that we can do while we're there. So, for example, being able to make sure that the significant ecosystem is protected while we're there. So, probably one of the issues that had come out in relation to the SEA Games is that in the development of the Clark Aquatic Stadium is that a lot of natural resources have been denuded and a lot of human and a lot of indigenous peoples have been displaced, no, and relocated. So this is basically sustainable sports tourism. Basically looks into developing all these destination attractions and events in such a way that we don't we minimize those types of issues and those types of problems. Minimal resource degradation, acceptance of resource values, and balancing between natural and built facilities. So Hinch, the writer of the sports tourism book, identifies three major development issues that is found in tourism, and also, of course, bleeds through sports tourism in specificity. So we have commodification and authenticity, we have globalization, and we have strategic alliance and partnerships. So what is commodification? So commodification is the process by which objects and people have become organized as things to be exchanged in a market, whereas cultural activities such as sport once were based primarily on its intrinsic worth, but now they are constituted by market value. So commodification means that cultural practices and cultural events, festivals, which of course originally were deeply rooted to cultural values and norms, due to tourism, they are becoming sources of revenue. They are now having some sort of market value. And that's one of the issue, the things that used to have a very high cultural relevance before might have been denuded because these things now come with a price because, tourism is placing a price on them. And this might decrease the relevance of these cultural activities. And also this includes sport, and we have heard a lot of issues about excessive commercialization of sport, and how commercialization of sport and commodification of sport also decreases the inherent relevance of the sport as well. Of course, these are just critiques to that. I'm not saying that this is like true to everyone or objectively true, but these are of course things that had to happen in order to sustain the practice of these cultural values. You need to have people watch these cultural activities, these sports activities, in order to make it sustainable. But of course, we need to balance with the fact that of course people are paying to see this, but at the same time, how do we make it as authentic as possible? How do we make it as inherently true and still rooted in the very spirit of the sport or the very spirit of the culture? According to critics, commodification causes the erosion of authenticity of certain cultural and sports activities. And one of the reasons why it does is that the activities that are being done now when there are tourists around is becoming stage authenticity. And stage authenticity is the process of commercialization that makes real authenticity destroyed, and a covert stage authenticity emerges. Like for example, when you attend a festival, in the Philippines, like for example, Morlones Festival or Panagbenga Festival, parang it's a spectacle now. It's so much entertainment, which of course could erode the fact that these festivals are really deeply rooted in cultural values, but because we see more spectacle than meaning making of all these festivals and these dances. Like for example, Panagbenga is a celebration of harvest, and flowers blooming in Baguio. However, because of the staged spectacle that comes with the festivals in order to attract a lot of tourists, the tourists who arrive there really just enjoy the spectacle, but they don't really completely understand the deeper cultural meaning of the practices and all of the rituals that are being shown there. So that's an example of stage authenticity, and could also be seen in sport as well. But of course, stage authenticity is not all negative. So some critics also suggest that there are positive elements to stage authenticity. Tourists oriented products frequently acquire new meanings for the locals as they become a mark of their ethnic or cultural identity, a vehicle of representation before an external public. Because one of the things that can really validate or increase the value of the culture is through a showcase. And therefore, being able to showcase your culture, being able to showcase your sport, increases the meaning that you have for that given activity or for that given ritual. And of course, this stage authenticity, according to some critics, say that this is not really something that denudes the cultural practice or the sports activity, but this actually adds more layer to the authenticity of the activities. In this picture, you would see a basketball among effeminate gays, no, in gay people, no, in a barangay, and this served to be a very spectacular sports event that nearby towns would visit in order for them to have a spectacle. Some would say that this denudes, no, this staged game, basically breaks a lot of rules in basketball and basically elevates basketball to just a comedic sense. So a critic might say that this is just stage authenticity. This is not authentic basketball. But some critics would say that this might be also a different understanding of basketball. That basketball is not just about rules. Basketball is also about self-expression. It's also about having fun. So these are some of the arguments that we have towards stage authenticity in both culture and sports activities. However, Wang rejects the notion of stage authenticity because Wang believes that there is no absolute authenticity, and authenticity of a certain practice, whether it's cultural, ritual, or a sport, is constructed. It's something that we do and something that we say is real because we do it. Like for example, rock climbing now is a sport, and usually rock climbing is done outdoors. But lately, we have seen a lot of sports which were moved indoor, and this phenomenon is called indoorization of sports. Sports like rock climbing, ice skating, which were originally done outdoors, are being moved indoors. So, do we say that this is a stage authenticity? Are we saying that these are less authentic sports, or are these just sports whose authenticity has been reconstructed in order for it to be enjoyed by many more people, and not just those people who could, find a mountain and climb it, or find a good place to do ice skating, So, Wang argues that, authenticity is subjective, and therefore it could be constructed and reconstructed in the name of tourism and in the name of sport as well. And therefore, when we understand that authenticity can be constructed, then making these rituals, making these sports activities visible to a tourist audience can make an emergent authenticity, or reconstructing the authenticity to develop a new type of authenticity for that specific cultural activity or sport. Now, for example, it's basically the gradual emergence of authenticity in the eyes of the visitors, meaning the visitors are also being enjoined to reconstruct the reality or the authenticity of what they are watching. Now, for example, Disney Park. Disney Park is seen to be a made up, a made up scene, that visitors are only watching. But later on, we now include Disneyland as an important icon of American culture, and therefore the fake play, not really fake, but the staged plays and the staged acting that we see in Disneyland, these are no longer staged authenticity activities, but these are actually a part already of what makes it to become a real American, having Disney as an icon. This is also true in extreme sports. Like for example, extreme sports usually doesn't have an audience, especially when you do it outside, right? For example, parasailing, or when you have, dirt road biking. Usually when you do this in nature, you don't have any audience. And so, others might argue that when you videotape yourself, or you make people watch, or you put it in a stadium, all this dirt road biking, it decreases its authenticity. But others would say na no, we are recreating these extreme sports and we're making them more acceptable in the sporty community, that we can include these activities as well. And now in the SEA Games, extreme sports like skateboarding, it wasn't something that has been considered before, but now we have it in the SEA Games. So this is an example of emergent authenticity, from something that has been an outdoor activity, now we are reconstructing its reality as a sport. Wang also introduces the concept of existential authenticity. And we say existential authenticity, a tourist will be able to feel the realness or authenticity of the cultural practice when that certain tourist engages in the cultural practice. So for example, when we do dress up, of wearing the traditional clothes of a certain country when we visit them, this is an example of elevating the authenticity because you are now participating on the culture that you are trying to see, or trying to visit in your tourism. And the good thing about sports is that, a big part of enjoying a sports tourism destination is actually engaging in the sports itself. So, big points, ang sports destination in relation to existential authenticity, because people who visit a destination really engage in the spectacle of sport, especially if they are active sports tourists. So yun nga, sabi nga ni Wang, tourists are searching for authentic experiences rather than authentic objects. The emphasis of sport is on performance, competition, and uncertain outcomes, means that each event or active engagement in sport is authentic. According to Wang, there are 4 subcategories of existential authenticity. The first one is intrapersonal authenticity, and basically these are the bodily experience that we have when we are engaging in a tourism product. So, syempre, if you're engaging in a sports tourism product, like if you're actually doing sports, then check box na ito. You are experiencing intrapersonal authenticity. Next, we have the self-making authenticity. Of course, the first one is biological, your body feeling the experience. The next one is psychological, the extent to which your experiences in engaging in a cultural activity improves or changes your mindset and adds up to your sense of identity. So of course, if you're engaging in sport, you don't only just experience bodily experiences while you're doing the sport, but you also have developed, status and roles as you go along doing the sport. Next, we have interpersonal authenticity related to family and team. So being able to experience the sport together with friends, together with family, together with peers, and together with teammates, of course, it definitely increases, the realness of the sports activity for you. And finally, interpersonal authenticity related to the touristic community. So, being able to engage as spectators or being able to engage as players in the sport, and also engaging with the other tourists in that specific activity, whether it's cultural or sport, also increases the authenticity. So, like I said, for active sports tourists, for sports tourism, it's easy to check all the existential authenticity subcategories. The next issue that affects the development of sports tourism is the presence of globalization, and it's inescapable. We have it now. So globalization is the increasing intensification of global interconnectedness. And there are 3 aspects of globalization, which are economic globalization, which basically means the movement of goods and services, from between and among countries. and also increased trading between and among countries, and movement of people, in relation to work and tourism. And of course, we have cultural globalization, the movement of information and cultural practices from one country to another or to more countries around it. The movement of information through the internet, so we can easily learn about the culture of other countries and adapt to it and diffuse it with our culture. And of course, also tourism has something to do with cultural globalization as well. And also, it also is connected with economic globalization. When global companies, such as McDonald's, such as Burger King, when they localize their brands, when they move to other country, that is also a mixing of our culture. So that's cultural globalization. And of course, we have political globalization, wherein the governance extends or transcends above the nation state, and we have now governance bodies that are looking at the whole of the globe and not just per nation. And of course, in relation to sports tourism, we have the World Tourism Organization under the United Nations, and we have the Olympic Committee. So these are, of course, all things that influence the way sports tourism could develop in a given community or a given nation state, because we are seeing or we are experiencing it together with the world while we are interacting with the world. So sports now is being globalized, dati we don't have football in the Philippines, but because being football is a globalized sport, we now have it here. Basketball, for instance, is also a globalized sport, and sport in general, is globalized. It's something that we all experience in each and every culture and nation state. So what are the agents that globalizes sports? Syempre, the first agent of globalization is the media and the internet. Of course, syempre, we are able to watch sports, done in other countries. So we get to watch NBA and we get to learn about the players. We also get to watch FIFA and we get to know the players. We also get to know the culture of other countries wherein those games are also done, And another agent of globalization in sport are the sporting goods manufacturers and really retailers that has a global reach. For example, Nike, Reebok, and etc. etc. So of course, this multinational corporations, they access many parts of the world and are able to touch different societies. So what are the issues that are found in the globalization of sport? And probably when you do your international issues in sport and your sports sociology classes, you've already discuss this. First is the homogenization of sports, because we now have setting a global standard for sport in order to have a fair competition for everyone. Then sport now becomes a homogenized thing. Some people would even say it's boring, that you cannot innovate outside the rules given. So the stadium, the sports field, the rules are standardized so that there's an equal level of playing field for everyone. However, one of the potential that sports tourism could do, when sports tourism is developed in a community, is that it can help in diversifying sports. Meeting cultural and geographical context with the sport, so that you are not just promoting the sport in the sports tourism destination, but you're also promoting local context. And a good example of this are the marathons that we have. So there are marathons that are simpleng marathons lang, 2-kilometer marathons, 10-kilometer marathons. That's the simplest thing. But these marathons, they also evolve. Like for example, we now have an urban marathon, one urban athlete marathon. So, included in the marathon, yung tatakbo sila sa emergency exit ng mga condominium, so that, it will include the context. Or for example, the multi-sport marathon, like for example, decathlons, For example, sa decathlon, they could also include fencing, if it's something that's within the local context of the geographical area, or they could include, new sports that are the strength of the community where the marathon is being done. So this is an example of how sports tourism could help in the diversification of sports. And finally, in relation to development, there should be strategic alliances and partnerships, which is of course in the Philippines, the way I observe how they were able to plan and manage the SEA Games. I think there was a lack of involving some of the important stakeholders in relation to partnerships. So alliances encompasses the broad range of stakeholders associated with their development and recognition of mutual interests. So later we'll talk about, in relation to tourism and sports tourism, who are the stakeholders that must be in the table of planning sports tourism attractions, destinations, and events. Domain focused, then that is goal-oriented rather than organization-oriented. So we look at shared goals of this committees or stakeholders instead of just looking at one vision na isa lang na sector ang mag-ibe-benefit. So in this video, we were able to talk about issues in sports tourism development. We defined development plan, sustainable tourism, and we also discussed about the three major issues that generally development has both in tourism and in sport. And these are commodification and authenticity, globalization, and strategic alliance and partnerships.